So, where Edward Weston had a style that really focused primarily on things and even turned landscapes and figures into really sculptural forms, Ansel Adams, while he shared a lot with Edward Weston, Ansel Adams is really known for his landscapes. Ansel Adams had a very long career that went from the 1920s right up until his death in 1984. He first started showing his photographs in 1922. He was best known for landscapes. He had a particularly strong connection to the national parks, especially Yosemite. And Ansel Adams also had a long-standing relationship with the Sierra Club, and for many, many years, his photography was synonymous with Sierra Club calendars and prints that you could get from the Sierra Club. But he served on their board of directors. They had a gallery and featured his photography in their gallery. So his photography is strongly associated with promoting the beauty of the unspoiled, majestic wilderness of the American West. This is the kind of landscape that Ansel Adams is really revered for. So this is a landscape of the Sierra Nevadas in Manzanar, California. If you look at the things that are closest to us in the frame here, the grass and the boulders that are very close to the vantage point, and then look all the way in the distance at the tops of the mountains and the clouds on the tops of the mountains, everything is in razor sharp focus, and there's a full tonal range. So there's detail, there's texture, there's material to attract the eye all the way from close to us to the immense distance. That's only possible because of that super sharp tiny little aperture, and because of a very large sheet of film that Ansel Adams is using in his camera. So those tools are necessary to achieve this, and a tremendous control of the medium and all that it's capable of. But when Ansel Adams puts those things to work, you have this really marvelous symphony of a photograph of the American Western landscape. So his photographs were taken in all different seasons, vertical and horizontal. They tend to have in common that they don't really have evidence of human habitation. Of course, there are exceptions to that, but the style that he's best known for really treats the landscape as if in all of its majesty, it has not yet been touched by human hands, and people embrace that purity of the unspoiled wilderness. So Ansel Adams was not just a lover of nature, he was a true modernist in photography to the maximum of what that meant in his time. He was highly respected by Alfred Stieglitz. He was on the board of the Museum of Modern Art, and he strongly advised them in their practice of collecting photographs. Alfred Stieglitz's gallery, An American Place, gave Ansel Adams that gallery's second ever solo photographic exhibition, so highly respected by Stieglitz, and he shared significant goals with Stieglitz. So the F-64 group, above all, was modern and it was formalist. Another beautiful example of Ansel Adams's photographs. You can see his interest in repeating forms in an elegant, balanced approach to texture, to lights and darks. All those things that Stieglitz prized in photography. They're there in Ansel Adams's photographs. More again of the repeating forms and the dramatic sweeping lines that pull it together as a very modern, bold composition. So these compositions of the natural landscape are bold and dramatic, but also subtle and in tune with the changing seasons. So all of these things that Ansel Adams achieves in photography are highly dependent on a technical mastery of the medium. And this comes to be codified by Ansel Adams in a system he calls the zone system. He published a series of books about the zone system, and this is a way of mastering the technical demands of photography. The motivating idea is that it is the responsibility, the duty of the photographer to live up to the capacity of the medium of photography. The full tonal range should be represented in that black and white print. No detail should be lost to overexposure or underexposure. And Ansel Adams used to say that the negative is the score and the print is the performance. So let's consider what we mean by the zone system. In the scale of tones of the photograph, it's broken down into 10 zones, with 0 representing the blackest black that the photographic paper is capable of printing, and 10 representing paper white, where there's none of the silver is exposed at all. So the darkest dark is 0, the whitest white is 10, and then that's broken down into the 10 steps in between the darkest and the lightest. All of those zones must be represented in the print. So in this print of Moonrise Hernandez, New Mexico, you can find examples of detail being visible in every zone from 1 to 8. There's no detail in 0 or 10, of course, but there's detail in all of the different zones in between. So nothing is overexposed, nothing is underexposed, and every zone is adequately represented. This is harder than it might sound to achieve when you're working with the tools that Ansel Adams was working with. So to achieve these effects with the finished photograph, it requires accurate exposure, accurate processing, and accurate printing. And all of those are complex. At the time of exposure, you have to expose it for just the right amount of time for the light that is available. There are tools, light meters available to meter just the exact amount of light that's coming off of everything that you can see out there in your visual field, and the photographer uses that data to calculate what their exposure should be for just exactly how long it should be, using the aperture that they're using, which is of course the smallest available aperture because f/64, right? To be able to process the film accurately. It's not just a matter of using the right chemistry and the right balance. They have to process it for the right period of time and the right temperature, and changing any of those things will have an effect on the degree of contrast, how much contrast you have in the darks, how much contrast you have in the lights. And that's also true about processing the print. The chemistry that you use, how long you process it, and the temperature, that affects how your print is going to look. So there are many things that need to be controlled at every step along the way, and Ansel Adams had an elaborate and complex and technically demanding system in place to teach, and that was the way that photography was taught as a fine art form, right up until the advent of digital photography. So if you're learning Photoshop now, if you look at the contrast curves in Photoshop, but using an adjustment layer with curves, that's all drawn from Ansel Adams. That all comes from calculating the degrees of contrast as they were calculated, adapting to the silver-based processes that Ansel Adams used. When you hear this quote that Ansel Adams said that says the negative is the score and the print is the performance, Ansel Adams was also a classically trained pianist who played piano all through his life. So music was another very important aspect of his life, and that metaphor, had resonance for him. But this, not a great quality photograph here. It's kind of rough, but it shows you how he, as a printer, would not always print things exactly the same way. So he's able to achieve a zone system quality print with variations, by changing the kind of paper that he's using, by changing the kind of filtration that he's using in the enlarger. So the process of printing from the negative, there's as much artistry in that printing process as there is in capturing the picture in the first place.